Good morning and welcome to the latest in the Brooks Macdonald series of Family Business Insights with me, Paul Andrews, your host for this morning. We're joined today by a panel of experts from both Brooks Macdonald and Turk and Connell to talk around the challenges affecting family businesses and navigating their future in light of the changes last year in the budget and inheritance tax changes and the other challenges facing family business owners across the UK. As I said, my name's Paul Andrews. I run Family Business United, an organisation that champions family businesses. 5 million family firms across the UK, employing about 14 million people. And until the budget last year, family businesses really took advantage of the reliefs available for inheritance tax planning so that they could pass the shares on predominantly tax-free to the next generation. But that's all changed. The changing succession landscape is giving quite a lot of cause for concern and conversations to be had by family business owners across the UK. They need to plan, they need to consider, and they need to actually have conversations to make sure their plans are enacted as well as they can be. And I'm delighted to be joined this morning by a panel of experts, Tom Edmonds from Brooks Macdonald and both Mike Kane and Kenny MacDonald from Turk and Connell. Before we get on to the detail, I'd just like to remind you this session is being recorded. So if you want to listen back later, you can do. And if you want to pop any questions for our panel, please do so into the chat function. So Tom, I'm going to ask you to start. Just give us a brief introduction to yourself and what you do at Brooks Macdonald.
Yeah, so my name's Tom Edmonds. I'm a financial planner at Brooks Macdonald, and my focus is very much on the individual as opposed to the company, and specifically today looking at life after the business and how they can use their assets to provide for their retirement.
Okay. Mike, if I can come to you.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. So I'm Mike Kane. I head the business law team at Turk and Connell. There are 250 people within the firm specializing in owner level advice, and my team in particular advises on business succession. So the sorts of things we're going to talk about today really interact with Tom and with Kenny on the tax side.
Okay, so Kenny, are you a tax partner at Turk and Connell?
Yep. So yeah, I head up our tax team here at Turk and Connell, Paul. Working closely with Mike and Tom on these types of issues that we're seeing today, predominantly giving tax advice to entrepreneurs and owner-managed businesses.
Okay, so Kenny, probably a good place to start. The budget threw up lots of challenges, issues around the changing tax regulations for inheritance tax in particular. What are some of those key tax implications for family businesses that they need to be aware of?
Yeah, I think as you alluded to earlier, Paul, there was a status quo that everyone had been relying on forever, that the family business in this context was protected from inheritance tax, and family pensions or pensions and pots built up also protected from inheritance tax. Chancellor changed all of that. We now have a £1 million lifetime allowance effectively where 100% relief is available. And after that, the relief reduces to 50%. So it's a 20% effective IHT charge for assets with value over £1 million, which is cutting across both agricultural and business property reliefs. And coupled with that is the new inherited pensions rules. Previously, those were exempt and could be inherited from an inheritance tax perspective, but will now, from April 27 anyway, be subject to inheritance tax along with all other assets. So that is what's bringing us here today, Paul, and lots to talk about in that respect.
There's some significant changes in the budget that people need to talk about and actually action from now on going forward.
Yeah, huge, absolutely huge.
And Tom, we've often talked, succession planning is notoriously difficult and has been for generations. It causes people to talk around mortality and the loss or the passing of the older generation. But these changes in terms of the laws and the rules around succession are going to make it even harder to have those conversations, but they need to be had. So from your perspective and the wealth position, how does that change for you in terms of that conversation?
I don't think it's changed the conversation. It's just brought it into a much sharper focus for business owners. Obviously, planning for life outside of the business is a lot easier if you know how long you're planning for, but people don't know that. You don't know how long you live. You don't know what sort of quality of life you're going to have. So when we are looking at planning for life after the business, it is very much, we need to assume that you're going to be along for a long time, and we need to make assumptions about your expenditure, not just the day after you retire, but all the way through to the day you die. And there will be a number of different scenarios for people that are looking at succession planning. And Mike and maybe yourself are more are better to talk about how they actually pass on the business. But to my mind, there's two different types. There's ones where you gift your ownership of the business, and the other type is where you sell that. And if you're gifting, obviously there's nothing coming back to you, so you need to make sure that you've built up sufficient provisions outside of the business to fund your lifestyle after you've finished working. And actually what Kenny was talking about, that sort of £1 million allowance, could be that people retain £1 million worth of ownership in the business in order to receive dividends and such, to supplement some form of income, and that will be for husband and wife if it's someone who's married, and then you just need to be careful about what happens, what you do with those shares on your death, because that allowance doesn't pass on to the spouse. But we use a tool called cash flow modeling, where we build in all the clients' assets that they've accumulated, and we make assumptions about growth rates and how much they want to draw from that to look at how sustainable is that income stream for the rest of their life. If they were to live to 100, if they were to live to 90, etc., things like that.
And I guess you could argue that it's actually made the conversations around wealth planning and long-term planning for succession and post-succession even more difficult than before, because you need to have honest, open conversations with people that don't quite know what their future holds.
Yeah, exactly. And the other thing that, as again, coming back to what Kenny was saying, pensions were the pot that you touched last, because that was exempt from inheritance tax. Whereas now they now fall into that inheritance tax bracket from 2027. So we need to think about how we make the most of that. Do we take the tax-free cash? Do we draw down the income, or do we use some of the other assets that are also inside the estate?
Yeah, one of the things I'm asked, Tom, quite a lot at the moment with the community is it really worth paying into a pension pot anymore?
Yeah, well, so, pensions still do have their place, and there are still a lot of beneficial reasons for an individual or a company to pay into a pension. The money that goes in, you won't have to pay income tax, and you won't have to pay national insurance on that, as opposed to if you were to take that in the form of a salary. Equally, money inside a pension does grow tax-free, and you're allowed to still take 25% of your pension as a tax-free lump sum. So in that regard, it's good. But obviously what you don't want to do is, leave too much, because it will be subject to inheritance tax.
So complex conversations around the whole wealth planning piece, and they're not going to go away by the sounds of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's going to be different for everyone. There are no hard and fast rules that say you should always do this, you should never do that. The other scenario that you need to sort of think about is if someone does sell their business, whether that's to the next generation or externally or some form of trust within the company, how do they make sure that those assets are structured in the right way to provide for the rest of their life? And again, cash flow modeling comes into play there, and there are various other structures that you can look at in terms of making sure it's as tax efficient as possible.
Okay, that's really interesting. There's some interesting things that we can pick up again shortly. Mike, that must resonate with you in terms of the conversations you must be having with your clients.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've certainly seen more urgency around planning, Paul. People really get that things are changing, and people are spooked by it and worried about it. So we do have a large number of live cases on the go at present where we're talking through things with clients. Absolutely.
And are those conversations, Mike, are they being expedited by the changes faster than you've seen previously?
Yeah, I think people are certainly bringing those conversations forward. So, we might have expected to start having those conversations with clients, mid to late 50s, and it's starting late 40s, early 50s. I would say as a general comment. Yeah. What Tom had to say about complexity is absolutely right, though. So while there are some key solutions that we can look at for families, there's a lot of complexity around their particular situation. So pensions, for example, and it's already been said that pensions could have been passed down inheritance tax free, and that's no longer the case. So people are looking at drawing down pensions and using funds within that to fund lifestyles going forward. It goes without saying that tax is just a complete minefield across capital gains tax, stamp duty taxes, inheritance tax, business property relief, all the stuff I think you've been very vocal about in the last 2 or 3 months, and quite rightly so, because there's a definite sea change around that. Are people chatting to you about inheritance tax changes? And
yeah, it's probably the biggest concern. I think I alluded previously that I was involved pre-Christmas with a big farmers rally in London where it was the #1 topic of debate, and rumours in terms of things changing. I guess, Kenny, I want to come to you in terms of that. It is the conversation that everyone is having, and it is the #1 issue that the family businesses need to make sure it's on the agenda. But the bigger picture that still sort of surprises me is the number of people that don't have a will and then aren't actually doing the full circle kind of review. Do you think, the first question I've got for you is, do you think in terms of going forward, the Chancellor will make any revisions to the plans that are in place that will make things easier going forward?
I think you can say simply no. There has been a bit of doubling down, I think, from the government on all of this in terms of their intent, direction of travel. Reliefs are too generous, not being used in the way that they were intended to be used. Way back at the outset of all of these reliefs being introduced. Anecdotally, you can hear some stories around about grandfathering provisions and whether there will be some sort of relief for people at a certain age in a pensions context, or that kind of thing. But it's all just sort of golf club chat at the moment. I think, Paul, to be fair, there's nothing at all firm. In fact, there's probably still a bit of detail to come rather than winding back in terms of what the new rules would look like. So no, I can't see anything fundamental changing in the way that these new rules will be introduced, unfortunately.
I have to say, sadly, I agree with you, based on the conversations we've been having with HM Treasury and some of the MPs we've been speaking to. And I think the challenge that we all have as a community with the family businesses is that everything at the moment is out for consultation. So whilst the announcements have been made in the budget, it's still under review and under consultation. So it's not hard and fast. The rules haven't been set yet. So we're having conversations and trying to preempt and make the best decisions and help families make those decisions. But there's still a little bit of an area of ambiguity, Kenny, isn't there, in terms of what final outcome will be?
That's absolutely right. I mean, obviously for the APR, BPR changes, it's April 26. For the pension changes, it's April 27. So I think it's important at this stage that we don't dive into things with clients and that we actually take our time to assess what is actually right for that particular client. And I think, as Tom mentioned there's not going to be rules X, Y, and Z here as to what is the solution to this problem. It's going to be different for different businesses, different families who may want to approach this in a completely different way from the next business. But that's the important point here. There is time to do this, and there is time to allow these consultations to be considered. I think we broadly understand how it's all hanging together. But as we'll come on to chat about in terms of the use of trust, for example, there's some quite vague wording in respect to how that will work. Can you make unfettered gifts to a trust before the new rules come in, for example? And the answer to that is, well, it'd be surprising if you couldn't. But there's a bit of ambiguity in terms of how the technical guidance has been issued so far. So yeah, very much further guidance, consultations, legislation, hopefully will follow in the not too distant future to give some certainty around all of this.
And I'll come to you, Tom, but it might be a question for all of you, really. But I guess the conversations depend on the person you're having the conversation with in terms of the family member, because I've spoken to quite a lot of senior generations in their late 70s and early 80s, and we've often joked in the past that there are business owners out there that say, I'm going to leave the business in a box, because they've known they can work up until the day they die, and the shares will have been passed tax free. And that's now not going to happen. And you've got that older generation where maybe they haven't had the conversations, or they haven't made the transitions, and they haven't passed on the shares, that are looking at it going, this is tricky because I may not live for 7 years. So the gifting opportunity starts to wind down. So how do you start some of those conversations, Tom? It's a big question, but how do you start some of those conversations with people in terms of their wealth planning journey going forward? Because it's tough.
Yeah, and I think going back to what Kenny said, we the important thing is to start the conversation now, not necessarily come to any decision about what the best option is. But for those people that have decided, they're going to leave the business in a box, at some point, someone else is going to need to take over. And I don't think there are a lot of people out there that when they die want their company to come to an end. So they do need to start planning for someone else taking over. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they have to leave the business. There are things like whole of life insurance policies that you can use that would cover the IHT liability. And yes, this is an extra cost to that individual, but it at least means that they don't have to, the person in the business doesn't necessarily have to leave because they either A, don't want to, or B, are crucial to the running of the company. But I think the point being, you still need to have a plan for what will happen when I'm no longer around.
Yeah, I think that's right, Tom. And just to help some thinking around this, usually ownership and management of a business is conflated, particularly in family business world. So it's really important to help people to unpick that you can own a business separately from the management of it, and to think about the professional management and what happens if you go under a bus. So a founder might typically have a plan where the ownership of the shares might pass down to the next gen, but the management of the business might go into the hands of professional people. But obviously that does take time to put in place. As you say, you've got to start thinking about it ahead of time. And now we have these new IHT complexities to feed in. So whereas under the old rules, it was ideal, not a nice thing to say, but it was ideal to die owning the shares from an IHT point of view. But that is where people are going to be caught out with the new inheritance tax rules. So yeah, really thinking about a separation of ownership and management of the business.
Yeah, Mike, I agree. I think succession planning in general, it gets lumped into that one box where it's succession planning, but actually the management versus the leadership piece and then the ownership piece are very different, and they need to be treated separately. And again, I guess you've then, as Tom alluded, you've got the personal scenario. So you've almost got three circles. You've got the ownership piece, you've got the management piece, then you've got your own personal scenario and circumstances in terms of what you want as an individual. And then you overlay family. And so it becomes multi-layered and actually a really complex thing to unpick and unwind. I like your analogy, Mike. I say I like the under the bus scenario. I think takes away the emotiveness of age. So I think every business where they've got a leadership team should be looking at what happens if I fall under a bus tomorrow and the steps that would mean, irrespective of age. And I think it's a kind of a mantra that quite a lot of the families are now talking about, because once the next gen have got those shares, they need to be thinking about succession planning and what happens if they were to fall under a bus tomorrow, and all that planning that goes with it. So the bus analogy, I think, works really well as a conversation starter.
Yeah. I think if there's a positive spin at all to be placed on the business, the budget changes that have come in, is that it must unlock some of these succession discussions within family businesses. It's no longer at all appropriate just to die with your boots on, to use that sort of term. And if the positive comes out because of tax changes, that oils the wheels on the discussions around about all these different things, including whether it's going to be family or non-family that take the business forward. And that goes all the way down to, well, if it's non-family that you want to be your chief exec or whatever the case might be, And how do you incentivize that individual to be excited about this business as you are as family members? And you know, obviously there's lots of different ways to do that. It's not quite appropriate to chat about that now, but there's lots of different ways to do that. But it's important to get ahead of that and get people along with the journey with the rest of the family.
I agree with you, and I think that's where the family business, the narrative and the family business history, the heritage, and how that whole shared aligned purpose piece comes together. And I think it's a bigger conversation. Mike, you mentioned the word trust earlier on, and it's an area again. It's quite a complex area of family business kind of conversation. But do you see the role of trust growing in terms of the succession conversation now?
I think that's one to bring Kenny into as well, because the rules around trusts are actually really complicated and are in a state of flux. So in the past, we have used a number of trusts really to hold shares as longer term succession planning, where it's a hold rather than an exit. So shares for skipping a generation, for example. But Kenny, you might have some comments on that.
Yeah, and absolutely. I mean, trusts have always been a useful vehicle in this context where you're not limited by the normal trust limits. Typically, if a mum and dad set up a trust with assets, not business assets, then you're limited to each of their nil rate bands, so £650,000, and can go into a trust before you're worried about an inheritance tax charge. However, that was always kind of pushed to the side where you had 100% business property relief. So you could put effectively your value for IHT purposes was relieved. So you could get those shares in. Now, notwithstanding that this is one of the areas where there is a bit of a state of flux, we're not 100% certain that we can do whatever we like with shares into trust ahead of April 26. That's the expectation, but it's not quite covered in reality just yet. But notwithstanding, it is a flexible vehicle where you don't necessarily need to say, persons A, B, and C will have this interest in the business and will get these dividends or whatever the case might be. You can have that or those interests held more widely in a trust for next generation and indeed future generations. It can be adapted quite flexibly, which is why trusts are popular in this context, notwithstanding the tax rules that apply to trusts, and they give that sort of flexibility to deal with multiple generations, not just that singular next generation, and of course offers control.
Yeah. So,
just wanted to flag one nuance, one change that we're seeing, and that is that there'd been quite a big rush before the end of October to implement succession plans for senior gen pool. So what we found is that that's been pretty effective, but the governance arrangements around the business have been suboptimal. People haven't really thought through the consequences of that, and I might just come back to that in a second. But the other change, of course, is that if adult children now end up as shareholders in the company, for the first time, we're having to really think about what happens if they go under a bus. So it was back to your point. So senior gen have offloaded an inheritance tax ticking time bomb, really, but onto next rising gen. And if the numbers are quite substantial, there is a significant exposure. So when we were chatting to Tom earlier, we were thinking about how insurance products could cover that. So things like inheritance tax, period of inheritance tax insurance, whole of life insurance, or cross option insurance. Maybe Tom just wanted to say a bit about cross option stuff.
Yeah, that's where I think for all family businesses, the intention is that it remains a family business where it can, and where for maybe the younger generation that are married, if something were to happen to them, you could see shares going to someone outside the family with very little experience and very little experience or even knowledge of the company. And actually, so it's important that when you're sort of structuring the terms of the business, there is some sort of agreement that there's an insurance policy in place that will pay out to the remaining shareholders the cost of buying back the shares that have just left the family. And there's almost an obligation within the structure of the business that should be done. I think you have to be quite careful about how you structure that from a legal perspective.
Yeah, I mean, on the governance side with that, there are tax issues with those cross options. And from a governance point of view, I guess if you don't buy back a deceased shareholder's shares, those could potentially move out to a spouse, and if a spouse remarries, take the shares with them. And we have seen instances where valuable companies, the control of valuable companies, have moved overseas, where there's been a remarriage. So it's lining up all the governance documents to make sure that these things can be controlled, and that you've got the right insurance advice and stuff in place to cope with it. So yeah,
sorry,
I mean,
sorry, Mike, just to interrupt you. In terms of those documents, are you talking about prenups, postnups, shareholders agreements, and the raft of other things that go with that?
Yeah, the full 9 yards. So lining up all the documents, wills, articles of association, shareholders agreements, cross option documents, prenups, postnups, they all need to be in a line to make sure that they're watertight and all interact correctly. Yeah, is it worth quickly just talking through a scenario where a family, I'm just conscious of time, Paul, so if a family is in touch with us and, we now have this IHT problem, guys, how do we fix it? We're senior gen, we own a valuable business, how do we fix that? And I just wanted to pick up on a couple of things. So Tom had said one of the options is to gift the shares. And we might just ask Kenny very briefly about the tax implications of a gift.
So what we would expect there, Mike, is that if we've got a trading business, then those shares should be capable of being gifted without a capital gains tax charge arising to presumably the parents or whoever's making the gift at that point in time. Lots of assumptions, lots of rules to follow there, but broadly speaking, if we've got shares in a trading business and there's not any sort of non-trading activities carrying on, then we would expect capital gains tax holdover relief to work. And in short, that effectively just exempts the capital gain for the people making the gift, and the recipients take on the base cost of those individuals.
Yeah. And the IHT position around that?
Would be a potentially exempt transfer like it currently is, no change to the rules there. Death within 7 years, then we have to have a look at how business property relief works there. If you make a gift now and you die after April 26 and within 7 years of making the gift, then you're unfortunately going to be caught by the new rules. That was part of the anti-forestalling. But you would go back to Tom and ask him to put some insurance in place to cover that sort of stuff.
Yeah. So one of the workarounds that we have for that, of course, is a family buyout process, which is very similar to a vendor-initiated management buyout of VIMBO. There are complex tax issues around this, but essentially what we're doing with this, Paul, is moving a business asset off the balance sheet of senior gen, where the family set up a new company to acquire the target company. Mm-hmm. So the price for that, and there is a price to be paid because it's not gift, obviously, is usually met from funds within the company, either cash out on day one or some loan notes. And there's some nice little planning bits that you can do, particularly where parents are worried about equalizing the children, making sure that everybody's happy. I think the worst thing to do is to give a child that's not involved in the business shares in the business. So from the business point of view, it encumbers it with a new layer of complexity and some dynamics that might be unwelcome. But a family buyout, of course, would use some cash within the business to equalize a child that's not involved in the company. And it allows the management of the company, the children involved in it, to take it forward. It does, of course, get rid of an IHT problem in one sense because the shares come off the senior gem balance sheet. But if there's cash that comes back in, back to Tom's issue about planning, looking at cash flows and the inheritance tax issue around having cash, there's a raft of other complexities with these family buyouts, and it needs detailed advice, but it is a neat solution, and it is something that we're working on with a number of families, and that's what I would say has been accelerated, that discussion around family buyouts in the last few months.
The other thing I guess I'm hearing from you, Mike, as well, and you alluded to the fact that there might be money changing hands at some point going back into the older journey, is it's really important that families talk to their collective advisory group and there's collaboration, because what I'm hearing is, and I hear it quite a lot now, is you can't just talk to your wealth advisor in isolation from your legal team or your accountants, because it's taking into account the business, the personal, the broad family and everything, and putting in the package that works for that family in that exact scenario. So it's not it's not off the shelf, it's not one size fits all.
I think that's right.
Yeah.
Paul. Yeah. Sorry, Mike. And what I was going to say is, often the answer to the question as to how much do I need to get out of the business, because often in a family buyout, notwithstanding tax position, there will be favourable terms, let's put it that way. But probably then Tom becomes the key guy there, because what is that number? What do parents or whoever is selling the business out to the rest of the family, what do they need to take off the table to allow them to live the standard of life they want to live? This goes back to Tom's.
And how much do we need to build in for contingency planning? And going back to Mike's point, if there are other family members that aren't involved in that, do we need to include a sum there to equalise that payment?
So we're talking about trying to encourage people to have conversations and navigating what clearly is a complex journey for any family and business together. What do you see are the biggest barriers to that succession planning conversation taking place?
I think in the past it had been, well, they are difficult conversations to initiate, but I think in the present, right here, right now, the concern around IHT BPR is really accelerating that and taking the brakes off those discussions. The expectation around keeping every family member equalised, I think, has been a difficult thing for parents. So finding solutions to break down those barriers are really quite key, and understanding the impact on the business and cash flows and tax and everything else is really quite fundamental. So
there's a real Tom, go.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I think because of the complexity, people do get sort of paralysis from the technicality of it. And I think you just need to, it's important that you go back to the basics of what are the main things that you want to achieve. We want the business to continue and we want it to stay within the family. And I want X, Y, and Z to benefit, and I want my retirement to look like this. It's at that point, once you understand what your main goals are, engaging with legal team, tax advisors, wealth managers, who can then set out a number of options available, because it will be different for everyone and there is no one size fits all, but setting out the options and what the drawbacks are, if there are any, in order to achieve what you'd like to do. So I think the complexity of it all has stopped people even starting that process. But I think the sooner you start and the sooner you engage with the relevant professionals, the quicker you can sort of come to a working conclusion and a plan for moving forward.
Yeah. I guess I totally agree with you, Tom. I think the other challenge we've all got with family businesses, we know that historically family businesses have found it really hard to find time to do the strategic thought and put strategy in place in terms of away from the day-to-day running of the business. So it's making sure this is a once in a generation, hopefully a once in a generation change and transition that families have to adopt to, and hopefully they are finding the time to have the conversations they need to have to move these things forward, because time is the one thing that's probably not on their side. Kenny, you mentioned positive. You said in terms of the conversation starting as a positive. Are there any other positives in terms of what all these changes mean for the family business sector, do you think?
I think it is just that there will be more succession. There will be people who are hungry, next generation with new ideas and modern outlook, etc., that will allow businesses to flourish. And perhaps there was a reluctance for them to be brought in and given a significant interest in a business because of the tax reliefs that wrapped around about it. But I genuinely see that changing going forward. There will be more people who might be asked to go and get some experience externally and see what the rest of the world looks like, but then bringing those fresh ideas into the family businesses and hopefully allows the sector to continue to flourish as it currently does.
Yeah, Mike, do you see any more opportunity?
For opportunity for
the family businesses to kind of, I think there's an opportunity for the next gen in terms of, as Kenny just alluded to, actually bring them on board, but onboarding them in a way that actually helps add value from an earlier stage to hopefully build a stronger, better family business going forward.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think your point, and back to Kenny's point about perhaps a reluctance at senior gen, and certainly we have a number of clients at that sort of level who have been reluctant to bring in 30, 40-year-old children into the business. We're seeing that happen much more quickly now, and the world is changing. It's quite fast paced, and it does need a variety of different views and different channels to pull into the company. So I think from a business point of view, absolutely this is good news. Yeah.
Okay. We're kind of running out of time at the moment, so just a couple of thoughts from each of you before I wrap up. Talking to the audience out there, I'll start with you, Tom. What advice would you give to someone now that may be starting this conversation? What do you think are the first 2 or 3 things they should think about when they leave today in terms of applying the kind of world we're in today, in the world of family business? What should they do? What should they be thinking about doing?
Yeah, I think, if this is someone who is looking to pass on the business, they need to think about themselves, start thinking much more about themselves and what they want their future to look like and how they go about achieving that. And at the same time, thinking about what do I need to put in place so that the business continues to flourish for when I'm gone. And I think that's great that there will be some people that will be thinking more about life outside of the business in the knowledge that business is in good, secure hands.
Yeah. Mike, I come to you.
Yeah, I think I would say this because I have a vested interest, but find advisors that you can connect with, people that will explain this stuff. It's very detailed, and also people with significant experience. There's so many bear traps in going through a family succession plan in terms of managing people, expectations, conflicts of interest, tax, insurance. So just somebody you can talk to and feel comfortable with. Yeah, and start the conversation sooner rather than later because it is complex.
Yeah, and Kenny, I'm sure you'll agree with that.
Absolutely agree with all of that, and clearly I'll focus on tax type stuff, and none of these changes from a tax perspective can be regarded as good news, but there are tools in the box to help to navigate it, and as Mike says, yeah, early conversations, and we can help to guide people through that.
Because that's really interesting. I guess in summary for me, there are plenty of challenges. It's very complex, and there's no one size fits all. It's not off the shelf for any family and business. I think we also need to step back as well and look at the fact that actually there's still consultation going on, and there is lots of lobbying going on by various trade associations and bodies, including FBU, in terms of trying to make sure we understand where the decision making is going. So if you're a family business out there and you haven't actually engaged with your MP or you haven't written to the Chancellor, then maybe now's the time to actually put your case forward and actually demonstrate what you do, and demonstrate that the people that are making decisions want to know what the implications are. So share your thoughts, that they're asking for them. So don't be shy in coming forward and share those thoughts. We do have to plan with the cards that we've been dealt, and we have to plan with what's on the table today. So conversations are really important, and as you've heard from the panel, conversations with all of your advisors so that you can form your opinion are really important. It's a complex area, so you need to find people you can talk to that talk in a language you understand, so you understand the complexities and what it means to you. But there are plenty of people out there and resources to help you do so. But don't put that conversation off, because those conversations could cost you in terms of your family business and your own financial position down the line. So be careful about not having those conversations and actually talk to people that can happen. This is the latest in a series of webinars that we've been doing with both Turk and Connell and Brooks Macdonald over the course of the year. Family Business United is an ongoing resource centre, a growing resource centre, and a growing membership base to help you achieve your goals, whatever they be, whether it continuing for generations to come, selling your business or doing something else. Take a look at the website. Join us next time for more Family Business Insights with the team from Brooks Macdonald, myself, Paul Andrews, and the team from Turk and Connell. We're here to help. So if your questions haven't been answered today, then please do reach out. We're happy to follow up on any questions that you have and any concerns that you have. And join us next time for some more Family Business Insights. Thanks very much.